All right, in this video we're going to talk about end-to-end testing using Protractor. And while end-to-end testing isn't exactly an Aurelia specific concept, it's really foundational probably to any front-end language to be able to write and execute good end-to-end tests. So we're going to do that now. What we're going to do is first clone down a small to-do list Git repository that I've created to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we will do git clone, and then we'll put the GitHub address in. So github.com/my name, so Nick Shalley /to-do-e2e.git. Okay, that's cloned down. So let's go ahead and change into the to-do E2E directory. And quickly, I'll just do an npm install to make sure that all of our dependencies for the project are installed. All right, great. So what we're going to do is actually just take a quick peek at the app. So let's just go ahead and do au run, and it'll go ahead and build our application for us, and we'll be able to check it out on port 9000. So once that's done building, I'll go to my browser. Okay, so we just have this very simple to-do application, and what we can do here, we can't even add items, but we can mark things as complete, and we can delete items. Yeah, really simple. So not a whole lot going on here, but this will be fine as far as just a really small bit of code to use with our end-to-end testing. So I'm going to go back to the command line, and what I'll do is I'll stop with the app watching here, and what I'll have you do is, if you don't have it installed yet, use npm to install Protractor, and make sure to install it globally so you can use it as a command line tool. So npm I, and then add that global flag and do Protractor. Great. So we now have Protractor installed, and so what I'm going to do is also install an Aurelia specific Protractor plugin, which will assist us in interpreting the tests as well. So we'll want to type npm install Aurelia Protractor plugin. Great. So now that we have Protractor and the Aurelia specific plugin installed, let's go ahead and open, for me it'll be Sublime, but whatever you use as your code editor. And so what you'll see is that I'm looking at your basic Aurelia application structure. This does have a test folder, but all that we have in it right now is our unit tests. So there's only really a couple things you need to do to start getting up and running with Protractor. The first thing you need to do is to add a Protractor config file. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save it as protractor.conf or config.js. Great. So what we're going to do is just export some configuration details for Protractor to use. So we can say exports.config equals, and this is just going to be an object here. So we'll use direct connect to be true. And this will allow direct connect to Chrome and Firefox without using a Selenium server. The next thing we want to add is a capabilities object. And within this capabilities object, we can add a browser name property, and we can just use Chrome. We could also use Firefox or Internet Explorer. You can basically test, and we'll play around a little bit with changing between at least Chrome and Firefox to see it in action. So then we also need to specify where our test specifications are going to be. If I uncollapse this test folder again, I propose we create a new folder here and call it E2E, or end-to-end. And all of our tests are basically going to live in there. So we can then say specs will live in test slash E2E slash, and then just this wildcard.js. And then finally, one thing we need to say is that we want to include our Aurelia specific plugin. So we can specify that using path. And we know that it's in our node modules folder, and it's just in the Aurelia Protractor plugin folder there. And believe it or not, this is the really basic configuration you need to do. There's plenty of other configuration you can do for Protractor, but we're going to keep it simple now. One other thing that we're going to want to do as well, which we shouldn't forget, is if we want to use ESNext, which I'm sure you do, we're going to want to require the Babel compiler and polyfill as well. So let's add that at the top. Great, and so what this is going to let us do is use the use Babel's compiler and polyfill within our end-to-end tests, and that will allow them to use ES6 and ESNext, so we can use imports and arrow functions and all that good stuff. So great, so we've done all the configuration that we need to. Let's go ahead and write our first test. So within end-to-end, I propose that we just, for simplicity, let's just make a file, and let's just call it todo.spec.js. Maybe that's an uninspired name, but that's what we'll call it for now. So this is using, as we've used before, we're going to use the, by default, Protractor uses the Jasmine test framework, so that's what we'll be using. And let's just describe this entire test suite here. So we'll describe it as user updates to-do list. So this will be like a really broad set of tests here. And then within here, we can have the different end-to-end tests that we want to run. So the first thing that we're going to want to say is that before each test, we're going to, we'll use async await here, and we're going to say before each test, we'll want to await browser.load and wait for Aurelia page. And this is where our little Aurelia helper is helping us, and we'll want to say that we'll be loading and waiting for localhost 9000. So yeah, that's nothing too complex behind that idea. So let's just really simply, if I go back over to my application, let's make sure that we're greeting the user, or in this case, basically that we're greeting me. So we are going to first load and wait for the page to load, and then we are going to say that the web page should greet the user. So let's use Jasmine to really easily say that it should load the page and greet the user. So we'll do an async await, expect. So what are we going to expect? We're going to get the only H1 element on the page. We're going to get the text from that element, and we are going to expect it to be welcome Nick. So let's give that a shot. So expect element, we use the by tag name, and this tag, as we mentioned, was H1. So element by tag name, and for that element, we will get text. And then we are going to expect all of this, the get text on this tag name. We are going to expect that to be welcome Nick. Great. So really, really simple. example here, but we just want to drive home the point and actually, start using Protractor for the first time. So the way we want to do this is I'm going to open up my command line, and I'm actually going to create a second command line here and go into my end-to-end to-do list directory. And then so on one side, I'm just going to watch our application. So this is important because the Protractor itself is not building and running the application. It's just accessing the page and then in an automated fashion going through our test cases. So that being said, what I can do in this command line is just say Protractor. So what I could say is protractor.config or conf.js, but this is actually the default, so I could just use Protractor. So when I press enter, what's going to happen is Protractor is actually going to open an instance of Chrome and execute the steps as dictated within the spec. So let's see how this works. Okay, so Chrome has opened. And so we ran through the test really quickly. So we can see here that we have 1 spec and 0 failures. So yeah, we see that Chrome has passed. So that's great. But perhaps I will change this to say, welcome Fred. And we'll try Protractor again in the command line. And we would, of course, expect this to fail. And there we go. So exited with error code 1, so Chrome failed 1 test. And we can even see up here message, expected welcome Nick to be welcome Fred. So yeah, our test is running as expected, simple though it may be, but this is great. So now we can move on to sort of more complex cases here. I guess what I should also show is if I go back to my protractor.conf.js, I can change this to say Firefox. And then let's see what happens when I change browser name to Firefox and run Protractor in the command line again. And here we go. I'm looking at the Firefox browser, and we tested it in Firefox. So yeah, this is a great way to quickly test use cases of your application in different browsers, which is really, really great. I'll go back to Chrome because it's my preferred browser to kind of demo this in. And then within our to-do specification, let's go ahead and start doing a little bit more testing with our application here. So what's something else that our application should do? Well, it should probably let a user, if I go back to the app, it should probably let a user mark something as done. So let's go ahead and test that. So it should let user mark to do as complete. Then we'll do async await. By the way, if you're not familiar with async await, it's basically syntactic sugar on top of promises, which you probably are familiar with. So it is worthwhile to kind of learn about those, learn about async await, because it's a really nice improvement on top of an already pretty cool solution to the callback situation we were dealing with for quite a while there. Anyways, so before I get too far into kind of, if I go back to my application, figuring out how to identify the checkbox and then telling the browser to click on the checkbox and then making sure that it puts, for example, a line through making sure it puts a line through the item. Let's talk a little bit about page objects. So rather than doing what I did here and just kind of excruciatingly writing out how to get the text or get a certain element to every time, we can use something called page objects, which makes life a lot easier because it cuts down on redundant code and allows your test cases to be a lot more readable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder within end-to-end here, and I will call it page objects. And then within that folder, I'm going to create a new file. What I'll save this as is a to-do list page object, for example. So let's just call it to-do-list.po.js is a convention for doing page objects here. What we'll do within this, this JS file is basically export a page object. So how does that work? Well, export class page object to-do list. So this will be our page object. And so if I go back to my spec, what do we want to do? Should let user mark to do as complete. So what we're going to want to do is first, we're going to want to, if I kind of write this out, mark a checklist, a to-do list item as complete, and then make sure there is a line through the checklist item. Yeah, so that's, I think those are the two things we're going to want to do. So let's actually go ahead and use our page object. What we're going to do is call these things that we would understand them to be within our page object, and then we'll use it here. We'll import our page object here, and then use that kind of in a way that makes sense here. So in our to-do list page object, we're going to want to mark an item as complete, and this will probably take an index. So for example, if I go back to my application, this is going to be index 0 if I want to mark that as complete, or if I want to mark this as complete, it'll be index 2. So I'm sorry, not mark item, this should be mark complete. And then what we can do is use an element.all, and then we can say by tag name, and it's the only input, so we'll just use input for now. But the beauty of using page objects, by the way, is if you find that a selector is inadequate in a future scenario, let's say for some reason I do decide to use input here, and then in a future scenario we have another input on the page, unsurprisingly, we may want to change this, but we only have to change it within this page object rather than going to all of our different test cases. So let's say we'll get all of our elements by tag name, and then we will get only the one that corresponds to the index that we pass. And then we basically want it to be clicked on. So yeah, this is kind of what we would have written in the actual test case to click on the item, but instead we've used this page object and we're just calling it mark complete. So how does that actually translate to the test case? Well, we can use an import at the top, and we can import our page object to-do list from, and we have it from this location, to-do list.po.js. And then before each, we can go ahead and just say this page object to-do list will equal a new page object to-do list. All right, so we're getting there. So it should mark a to-do list item as complete. Well, if I go back to here, we know that the first one is not marked as complete, so maybe we'll just say page object to-do list, and then what will we use? Well, we'll use mark complete. So mark complete, and the index will just do 0. And yeah, that's actually all we have to do to mark an item as complete. So if you think about it, not only is using this page object mean that this is reusable, but if you compare this, all this kind of unintelligible, not unintelligible, but it's significantly harder to understand than mark complete. So yeah, this makes it truly quite a bit more readable. So that's great. If we go back to our to-do list page object, let's just do this other piece. Make sure that there's a line through the checklist item. So maybe we'll call this something to the effect of, well, if we want to make sure that there's a line through it, maybe we'll get the text decoration for the particular item that we're looking at. So we can just call that a get text decoration method. So, and we can of course pass the index of the item that we want to get the text decoration for, and we'll use kind of a similar selector here. So we'll use an element all, and if I go to my source and I look in resources and elements, and if I go to todolist.html, well, we're going to look for the text decoration within this span item here, and we can see that the class for this is item, so that seems like a pretty reasonable selector to use. So we'll use element.all by CSS, and we will select by item. And again, we only want the item corresponding to the index that we've provided. And then what we can do is get CSS value, and we want the CSS value for text decoration. Great, so this method will return the text decoration for the item. So if I go back to my spec, what I can say now is await expect PO to-do list get text decoration, and we just want the text decoration of item 0, and then we would expect it to contain line through. Yeah, and so if our text decoration contains line through, we can be pretty confident that the item has a line through it. So pretty simple. And again, this is a lot more readable than whatever we're looking at within the, whatever's basically being hidden away within our page object here. So again, seems like a really great choice to go this way, but we haven't tested this out yet, so let's make sure that it works. Let's go back to our command line. Again, we'll do Protractor, and we'll watch as it opens Chrome for us. Oh, and we hit an error, so let's go back and see what's happening here. It doesn't appear to know what to-do list, PO to-do list is, and that is, of course, because we didn't properly scope PO to-do list, so we have to add this let PO to-do list statement here to make sure that we've scoped this to actually be able to be used by these other methods as well. So let's go back and try to run Protractor again. Let's open Chrome. Okay, great. So 2 specs now, 0 failures. So we actually went ahead and marked everything complete, and it worked pretty well. It all happens kind of fast. If for some reason, well, this is probably good to know because of the asynchronous nature of JavaScript in general, but if you ever need to make your browser sleep, perhaps you just want to see what's going on, you can just say browser sleep. Like, I'll just do like a full second here just so we can see what's going on. So I'll go back and do Protractor again. And this time, what it'll do is it'll mark it as complete, but then wait a full second for us. See? Yeah, and now we can actually kind of see what's going on. Not that we necessarily have to do that, but it can also be sometimes a good idea to at least give like a minimal browser sleep between an action and actually checking to make sure that it had the effect that you might have expected. Okay, so let's just do one final. If I go back to my application, and we're going to test the delete. So I'm going to delete one of these, and we'll make sure that that deletes correctly. So let's go ahead and declare what this test will be in its very readable format. So it should let user delete to-do item. I think that's pretty intelligible. So then we'll do an async function. Okay, so what do we want to do? So what I propose we do is, if I go back to my browser, I propose we first kind of figure out what the item text is for the last item. Make sure we store that away. Then we click the delete button for the second item, and then make sure that the new second item text is equal to the stored away text of the last item here. So let's first come up with a method for our to-do list page object here that lets us get the text of any item. So perhaps we'll just call it get item text. Again, we can take an index here, and we will return, again, element all selector. Again, we know that we can use by CSS item, and we will get the provided index, and we want to get the text of that item. So yeah, simple enough. So now we can just use page object get item text rather than all this stuff. And then finally, also, we know we're going to need to be able to delete an item, so we can add that as well as a method here. So we can call it delete item. Again, pass that an index, and we can return element all by CSS. And well, we're going to want to click on the delete button. So if I go back to my to-do list.html, and we can see that our delete buttons have a class of delete, so we can use that. So yeah, we'll select by delete, and we will only do the one specified with the index that's passed. And yeah, we'll click on it, much like we did previously when we marked something as complete. Okay, so again, what we're going to do is we are going to get the item text for the third item, which will be at index 2. We will then delete the second item, which is at index 1. And then we will get the item text again for the new second item, which is now at index 1, and make sure that the new text for index 1 is equal to the text that was formerly at index 2. So yeah, that's kind of complicated to say, but it's going to be pretty easy when we write it out. So let's go back to our tests and say we'll let the next to-do item equal to PO to-do list, and then we'll get item text again of the item at the second index, which will be our third item. And then after we get that, what we'll do is delete the item at index 1. So we'll do PO to-do list dot delete the item at index 1. And just for good measure here, let's do a browser sleep. We'll just do it for let's do it for 2 seconds. Let's take a peek at what's going on here. And then finally, we can do our await expect. And what are we going to expect here? Well, actually, we can, here's where you get your reusability a little bit. We can actually use the get item text again. So we can say PO to-do list dot get item text. And this time, we're going to expect the item text for element 1, right, to be what the next to do was. Okay, pretty cool. And again, you know, the page object concept is really cool, and you should definitely use it. Again, comparing line 14 here with all of this selector type information as compared to everything we wrote in these 2 test cases. Yeah, it's much more eloquent to just say, oh, this should be delete item. Delete item, I believe, is what we called it, right? Yes. So yeah, this is just much more eloquent to say delete item or get item text or mark an item as complete. Just makes a lot more sense. Okay, so let's go back to our command line. Again, let's run Protractor and see what happens. Here we get our Chrome browser. Okay, we've marked the first one, and we've deleted the last one. And yeah, as expected, sometimes these tests run so fast that you don't really catch what's going on. But as expected, that all 3 of our specs have passed because there's 0 failures, and we see Chrome passed here. And then, yeah, again, if I want to go back to my configuration, I can also say, show me this for Firefox. And I go back to the command line, and I run Protractor again. And we can basically go make sure that our use cases are running correctly in multiple browsers, which is, of course, what we want to do really for anything that we're doing here. Okay, great. Yeah, so 3 specifications, 0 failures, Firefox passed. So we're happy. And so this is really a great introduction. I've only gone through 3 different test cases here, but you can kind of see if you went through the last one with me as well, how this is different than doing unit tests, and this is a lot more end user focused, which is good because you want to verify not only that your units of code work, but that they're actually doing what the end user would want them to do. So thanks for joining me. I guess the one final thing I'd like to say about this is that there's many ways to use Protractor to test your application. I did use the Protractor CLI, but I know you can also use Gulp Protractor, and there's just many other ways to do it. So if you see it being done a different way, that's fine. I think the really important thing is that you're using some sort of tool to do end-to-end testing of your application.